This support makes a huge difference in dungeons. And as you can see, we don't even have a Crusader with the banner there. So you wanna know how to achieve something similar? Well, let me show you what equipments, what set items you can use to make this even better. Let's start with the most important part of the field, and it's going to be Inner Sanctuary. With Inner Sanctuary, we're going to need Empathy's Blessing. Empathy's Blessing will turn Inner Sanctuary a buff that grants 35% damage to everybody who's inside the circle. It will also reduce the duration from 9.2 seconds to 8 seconds. This is essentially the same buff that Crusaders has, but it is a flat percentual damage instead of making everything critical hits. And what that means? It means that if anybody critically hits, it will increase that critical hit by 35%. And of course, because we are a support build, we want to increase this duration by using Respite Sight. The Respite Sight will increase the Inner Sanctuary duration to 10.4 seconds. And because the cooldown is 30 seconds, that means you can have this up 1/3 of the time. You can decrease the cooldown with cooldown reduction gear if you can get your hands on those. If you feel like you really need the extra cooldown reduction, you can use this blind respite. You will be losing some damage because we are using chest pieces for the damage, so I wouldn't recommend that, but if you feel like it, you can use it. Now next up is going to be Cyclone Strike. With Cyclone Strike we are going to use Storm Spirit. With Storm Spirit, Cyclone Strike now generates powerful tornado that continually damages all nearby enemies. It lasts for 6 seconds, its cooldown is 12 seconds, so you can have it up half of the time. Now with this tornado, if the enemy is burned, your every tick will do a critical hit to that burned enemy. And because of that, our next skill is going to be Wave of Light. With Wave of Light we are going to use Shimmerlin. With Shimmerlin, Wave of Light now releases bursts of energy in all directions, dealing damage and burning them. The maximum hits with this is 3, but after the first hit it's only going to deal 30% of the normal damage. But with this skill, the most important part is going to be the burn. Because every time you use the Spirit Storm, like a Cyclone Strike, and then Wave of Light, you will burn them, so then your Cyclone Strike will critically strike everything that's burning. So this makes you do double damage with the Cyclone Strike. Now the next skill is going to be Mystic Allies. And the last two legendaries are going to be for Mystic Allies. And they are going to be Companion's Melody, and the other one is going to be the Rod of Echoes. And the other one decreases the cooldown, and the other one increases the duration. So with these items we're gonna have 13 seconds uptime with the Mystic Allies, and cooldown is going to be reduced from 30 seconds to 24 seconds. You should be using Mystic Allies every time you use the buff. This way you will be getting 35% more damage from your Mystic Allies every time you use them. And I would advise using Mystic Allies first and then using the buff, so you can get the maximum duration from the buff. And of course with the normal attacks we are going to use Fist of Thunder, as it is way better than the other option. You probably also want to know what set items you should be using with this build. Well, I have few options you can use. There is not like the best of the best with this build, but there is something you can use to make it just a tiny bit better. And once again we are going to use Grace's set, as yet again we are using Cyclone Strike with the continuous damage, and if you use the fourth set piece with Cyclone Strike and Mystic Allies, you will be triggering constantly the fourth set piece from the Grace set. And because you probably are using Mystic Allies and other stuff on the boss, that 5000 damage is going to be increased by 35%. Now I tried with this Urge, but the problem is you're not getting 30% increase for the buff, which is sad, but that's not working. The only way to use that would be 4-piece, but that only gives 30% attack speed for 3 seconds, and for a 4-piece it's kinda too much, so I'm not going to show it here. But we have two other options we can use with this build. and one of them is Shepherd's Call. Now this will give you 15% extra damage for your Mystic allies, and this is further increased by the buff, because you should be using your Mystic allies while you use the buff. This will decrease the time you need to be on the boss, because you're doing more damage to the boss. And the other one is going to be War Axe of Shalbaz. Now this only gives you 15% more damage with your primary attacks. It will be further increased with the buff, of course. Your burst damage is going to be less with this one, but everything else is going to be better because you're doing more damage with your primary attacks. It is up to you which playstyle you like more. Do you want to focus on the bosses or another thing? Now there is few things you should consider where you play this build. Firstly, the most important part is going to be position your buff correctly. As it is really thin, people doesn't really see the buff, people doesn't really know what it does, because everybody is running Crusaders, even though with the Monk you have the same, almost the same buff, as them both gives you 35% increased damage. And like here you can see, not everybody is getting the buff. I should put it more in the middle of the enemies and friendlies, so everybody can enjoy the buff. And the other thing with the buff, you should use it so your Mystic allies are getting the 35% buff also all the time. Of course, if you're playing with friends, then of course it's easier to talk where you're going to leave the buff. And every time you use Cyclone Strike, you should be using Wave of Light, because that will burn the enemies and you're just getting more damage. So remember to do that too. And there is also a Paragon tree you should be using in dungeons. And it is going to be no other than the Mastermind. Now we have two skills in the Mastermind that you will be using, although you need to have party of 4 different classes to fully utilize this tree. The first passive will give you 2.5% critical chance for each different class in your party. So in total that is going to be 10% increased critical strike chance, and that is 10% more damage. Now we have the other one, the other passive, and the other passive is going to give you 3 seconds vulnerability on the bosses with 20% increased damage taken by the boss. This is the highest damage increase you can get from any tree in the game. Now you're ready to go out there, do some dungeons, slay some monsters with probably one of the best builds you can use inside dungeons with the Monk. If you find this video helpful, please hit the like button and consider hitting the subscribe button too. And as always, thank you for watching. I really hope to see you on the next one. Have a good day.